You might have it in your home right now, on a shelf perhaps, or hanging on a wall, maybe tucked away in a drawer you rarely open. It blends in with everything else, quiet, unassuming. At first glance it seems harmless, ordinary, decorative even. But what if this simple item, this common object, was not as innocent as it appeared? Throughout history, and especially in the accounts surrounding one of the most extraordinary mystics of the 20th century, this object has been named as a spiritual obstruction, a hidden wall, a silent barrier between heaven and the soul. Padre Pio warned about it, not with alarmist sermons or dramatic gestures. That wasn't his way. But when the topic surfaced, when he encountered it, his voice would lower. His eyes would take on a depth, a seriousness, as if they were staring beyond the physical world into something most people couldn't see. Witnesses say there were moments he would walk into a house, smile gently, greet everyone with warmth, but then suddenly stop. His expression would shift. He would go quiet, and then, almost always, he would say it. There is something here that should not be. No one expected it, especially not the faithful. These were people who prayed, who lit candles, who believed. And yet somewhere among the icons, the pictures of saints, the family heirlooms, this object had slipped in, not through evil intent, but through ignorance, through trend, through the slow erosion of discernment. And Padre Pio, with his gift of spiritual sight, could see what it invited in. Not just clutter, not just distraction, but a spiritual heaviness, an atmosphere that repelled grace instead of welcoming it. What was this object, and why was he so adamant it be removed? The answer lies deeper, in the stories he never shouted, but always made sure were told. Padre Pio wasn't just a priest. He wasn't just a confessor, a man of the cloth, or a figure in robes surrounded by incense and Latin prayers. He was something far more rare. He was a mirror to the spiritual world, a soul so surrendered to God that heaven allowed him to glimpse what most of us never will. On his hands, his feet, and his side, he bore the stigmata, the visible wounds of Christ for 50 long years. Wounds that bled, that never healed, that caused him unrelenting pain, but which he carried in silence, in obedience, without complaint. He had visions, profound and often terrifying. He saw things that would shake the strongest hearts. He saw angels, glorious, radiant, full of light. But he also saw what few dared to acknowledge. He saw shadows, dark figures, movements in corners where no man stood, whispers that passed through rooms before words had even been spoken aloud. He often said with chilling clarity, "The devil is not a myth. He is not a tale for children. He walks among us." And Padre Pio, he could see him, not in the way we see with our eyes, but with a divine perception, a spiritual awareness granted by grace. He saw the fingerprints of evil on objects, in homes, in lives, not because he wanted to, but because he was chosen to. And that gift, it came with a weight. He didn't boast about it. He didn't speak of it often. But those who spent time near him, who confessed to him, who looked into his deep, watchful eyes, they felt it. He knew things before you said a word. He answered questions you hadn't even asked yet. He called out sins you were too ashamed to speak aloud. And still, he welcomed you. Still, he loved you. Because he wasn't there to judge. He was there to heal, to help souls see what he already could, to bring light where the darkness had begun to settle in unnoticed. And it was during these quiet moments, these deeply spiritual encounters, that he began to speak of something strange, not of demons in the form we expect, not of possessions or exorcisms or wild stories. No, he spoke of an object, something simple, something small, something that didn't scream danger, but whispered it. He had begun to notice it in homes, not in the homes of the careless or the corrupt, but in the homes of the faithful. Good people, people who prayed, people who gave to the poor, people who went to Mass every Sunday without fail. And yet, when Padre Pio entered their homes, physically or spiritually through their confessions, he sensed a presence, a pattern. Something didn't feel right. The air seemed heavier, the peace disturbed. And it always traced back to one thing, an object, a decoration, a statue, a symbol. Something that had found its way in, innocently perhaps, gifted, purchased while traveling, or adopted because it looked beautiful, mysterious, or cultural. But Padre Pio could feel what others couldn't. It carried something with it. He would not always name it directly, but his message was unmistakable. This does not belong here. This blocks grace. Remove it. He never said it with violence or fear-mongering. His tone was almost sorrowful, as if the object was not just a thing, but a wound, a fracture in the spiritual structure of the home. Because to him, spirituality wasn't confined to churches or altars. It breathed in the air of every house. It dwelled in the silence between prayers, and certain things, even seemingly harmless ones, could interfere with that sacred space. Not all evil comes kicking down the door. Sometimes it walks in quietly, unnoticed, smiling. It's easy to dismiss these things today. We live in a time where superstition and discernment are often confused, where the sacred is mocked and the profane is praised as artistic, edgy, or exotic. But Padre Pio didn't speak from theory. He spoke from experience. He had seen the consequences, in the tormented confessions of the suffering, in the spiritual blockages that would not break until the object was found and removed. What exactly was this object? We'll come to that. But more importantly, we must first understand that what we surround ourselves with affects not just the atmosphere of our homes, but the openness of our hearts. Padre Pio believed that. He lived it, and he gave his life helping others see it too. Because sometimes evil hides in what looks like beauty, and sometimes what blocks your blessings is something you welcomed in unknowingly, thinking it was nothing at all. It wasn't always the same shape. It wasn't always the same color. Sometimes it was black, deep, opaque, and polished like obsidian. Other times it was silver, engraved with delicate, swirling patterns. Occasionally it was wood, dark and aged, etched with symbols most people couldn't understand. It could be worn around the neck, hung on a chain, or wrapped around a wrist. It could be placed on a shelf, set on a table, or hidden in a drawer. Sometimes it was framed. Sometimes it stood alone. Some called it art. Others, culture. Some said it was a symbol of peace, of wisdom, of ancient energy, a souvenir, a gift, a family keepsake, even a fashion statement. But every single time Padre Pio encountered it, no matter what form it took, he would stop. His steps would slow, his face would shift. He wouldn't panic, he wouldn't scold, but he would pause, as if something invisible had brushed against his soul. And then, without fail, he would speak, softly, firmly. Just one word. Remove it. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't explain himself right away. And that made it all the more unsettling. Witnesses say his demeanor would change, from warmth and welcome to something quieter, more solemn. He would look around the room, often toward a corner or a shelf, and then he would begin to pray, not casually but deeply, with urgency, with gravity. He would bless the house, moving slowly from room to room, his hand raised, his lips whispering Latin prayers that echoed with ancient power. And when he returned to the spot where the object was found, he would insist, not suggest, that it be removed, not sold, not given away, not stored for later, destroyed. And he was clear about this. He said such things should never pass from one hand to another, because the spiritual weight they carried, however invisible, could cling. Some asked him why. Why such intensity over a simple item? But Padre Pio rarely gave direct answers. He believed in mystery. He believed in letting the soul recognize truth in silence. Still, when pressed, he would sometimes offer glimpses. These objects carry the memory of rituals, of invocations, of those who called upon powers that do not serve God. He believed they weren't just decorations. They were invitations, spiritual openings, gateways through which darkness could enter, quietly, without resistance, because it was welcomed. One woman remembered bringing a carved figurine from a distant country, something she had picked up in a market. It was intricate, strange, and she thought it looked exotic. When Padre Pio entered her home, he stopped just steps inside the door. His face grew pale. He didn't even need to see it. He pointed to the cabinet and said, "You must burn it." She hesitated. It had cost money. It was beautiful in its own way, but he looked at her again and said, "If you knew what I see around it, you would not wait another minute." So she obeyed. She threw it into the fire. And that night, for the first time in months, the nightmares stopped. The strange noises in the walls ceased. Her children, who had been waking up screaming, slept in peace. These weren't isolated stories. There were many, too many to dismiss. A necklace given as a protection charm, a mask purchased for decoration, a book containing ancient teachings, even paintings, abstract, eerie, filled with eyes and twisted forms. Each time the same response from Padre Pio: remove it. Because for him, it wasn't about beauty, or history, or sentiment. It was about what these things represented in the spiritual realm, what they echoed, what they carried, what they allowed in. He taught that not all evil is loud. Sometimes it is quiet, subtle, wrapped in color, texture, culture. But at its root, it resists grace. It disorients the soul. It clouds the air where prayer is meant to rise. And so, when he said remove it, he wasn't just protecting a home. He was protecting a spiritual space, a sanctuary where the Holy Spirit longed to dwell. Because if something, even something small, can block a blessing, isn't it worth letting go? So, what was it? A statue, a charm, an idol. But not just any idol. Not something as simple as folklore or a harmless trinket. This object, whatever form it took, carried with it something far deeper, a signature. It was almost always connected to occult symbolism. Dark patterns woven into its design, references to powers not of God, emblems worn by ancient cults or spiritual movements that rejected the light. It could look like a beast, a twisted creature, half animal, half man, or a dragon, mouth open in rage, wrapped in serpents. Other times it was more subtle, a face with too many eyes, a body with too many limbs. A symbol that looked sacred at first glance, until you looked closer. Then it revealed itself. A mockery. Mockery of the cross. Mockery of the Virgin. Mockery of creation itself. Sometimes it was an inverted pentagram etched into jewelry. Other times, an image of a deity from ancient mythologies, used today as decoration, divorced from its true meaning, but not its spiritual weight. And Padre Pio, he knew. He would see these things and grow quiet. Sometimes he would weep. Other times he would simply bow his head, as if praying for protection against something unseen. He once said, "Where these are, peace flees. Grace cannot enter. The Holy Spirit waits at the door." To the world they were art. To the sellers they were curiosities. To the collectors they were conversation pieces. But to Padre Pio, they were not just stone or metal. They were invitations, tiny doorways, left open, unwatched, unprotected, for something else to come through. And that something, and he never named it directly. But he described its effect: anxiety that lingered without cause, tension between family members that had no root, restless sleep, persistent illness, sudden outbursts, a heaviness in the air that couldn't be explained by temperature or season. He didn't speak in horror stories. He didn't need to. Instead, he spoke with the calm authority of one who saw beyond the veil. And what he saw disturbed him. He taught that not all spiritual attack comes like a storm. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through symbols we don't understand, through objects we bring home without discernment. And once inside, they change the atmosphere. They affect prayer, they harden hearts. They introduce doubt, confusion, apathy. "The devil is clever," Padre Pio once said. "He hides in what seems harmless. He wears beauty like a mask. But where he walks, the light bends." That is why Padre Pio was never passive about these things. He didn't say, "It's probably nothing." He said, "It must go." Because a home is not just a place to sleep. It's not just walls and furniture. A home, in spiritual terms, is a sanctuary. a place where grace is meant to dwell freely, where angels are welcomed, where peace should settle like morning dew, and anything that pushes that peace away, no matter how beautiful, rare, or fashionable, does not belong. Padre Pio believed that we must guard the thresholds of our homes like we guard the gates of our hearts, not with fear, but with wisdom, because the enemy isn't always loud. Sometimes he is quiet, he smiles, he flatters, he distracts, and then he stays, all through something that looked like nothing at all. So the question becomes, what symbols are hiding in your home? And more importantly, who or what did they invite in? There was a woman in Foggia, widowed, humble, deeply devout. She lit her candles every morning before sunrise. She whispered her rosary with trembling hands. She placed holy water by the door, and she taught her children to cross themselves before bed. To all who knew her, she was a woman of faith, gentle, sincere, unwavering. But inside her home, something wasn't right. Her children were always sick, not gravely, but constantly. Fevers, coughs, weakness that clung like fog. Doctors offered remedies, nothing lasted, and her sleep, restless, broken. She heard things, whispers in the corners of her room, shadows that seemed to move without a source, objects fell without reason. The air often felt heavy, too heavy for a home filled with prayer. At first, she blamed grief. Her husband had died years earlier, unexpectedly. She thought the sorrow still lingered in the walls, but as time passed, she began to suspect something deeper, something unseen. So, one day she made the journey to San Giovanni Rotondo to confess, to see Padre Pio. She waited for hours. When it was finally her turn, she stepped into the confessional, tears already rising. She hadn't spoken yet, but Padre Pio looked at her through the screen and asked, "Why do you keep the idol?" Her breath caught. Her mind raced. "What idol?" she asked, stunned. And then he described it. Exactly. A small sculpture, dark, carved from stone, with strange markings etched along its surface. It had been a gift from her late husband, brought back from a distant country during one of his business trips. She had kept it on a shelf, not out of devotion, but memory. It was part of his life, his travels, his story. She had never once considered it harmful, but Padre Pio said quietly, "It carries sorrow, it blocks heaven's breath, it must go." He said no more. He didn't scold. He simply offered absolution and a warning. She went home, shaken but obedient. That very evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, she took the sculpture from its place, walked into her small yard, and without hesitation, she burned it. The stone cracked in the fire. Ash rose like smoke from a forgotten incense. And that night, everything changed. Her children slept, truly slept, deep, calm, uninterrupted. No coughing, no tossing in bed, just silence. For the first time in years. And she too slept without fear. The room was still. The air felt clean, as though something heavy had lifted and drifted away with the smoke. From that day on, the sicknesses faded. The strange noises stopped. The peace she had prayed for finally entered her home. She returned to Padre Pio weeks later, not to ask for help, but to give thanks. And he simply nodded, as if he had known all along. Because to him, the problem had never been her prayers. It had never been her faith. It had been the presence of something that did not belong. Something small, but spiritually heavy. And when it was removed, grace was finally free to return. This was not just one story, it was one of many. Homes disrupted by objects misunderstood, not cursed in appearance, but in essence. And in every case, Padre Pio's guidance was the same. Remove what hinders God, and watch what happens. Many say those times are over, that the days of evil hiding in objects, of spirits clinging to things, are stories from a distant, more superstitious past. We're modern now, rational. We think we've grown beyond such beliefs. But what if The enemy hasn't disappeared, only adapted. What if the darkness learned to wear new clothes? Today, these objects don't come from the shadows. They come from store shelves. They're marketed as home decor, art, culture, expression. They promise inner peace, balance, energy. But Padre Pio once warned, even the smallest serpent can carry poison. And poison doesn't need to scream. Sometimes it simply sits quietly on a shelf. Crosses turned upside down, eyes inside triangles, symbols taken from rituals and rebranded as fashion, figurines that once stood on altars of gods who were never gods at all. And then there are the subtler forms, books that charm the mind but darken the spirit, music that stirs the flesh but silences the soul. We welcome these things in, without discernment, without prayer, and we marvel at how quickly peace vanishes. We say our prayers, but they feel distant. We seek clarity, but the house feels fogged. Arguments rise more easily. Fatigue lingers longer. Sleep is restless. And we never stop to ask, what have I allowed in? Padre Pio saw this coming. He knew the devil would change tactics. No longer knocking loudly, but slipping quietly through the front door, disguised as beauty, as intellect, as harmless decoration. But evil does not lose power simply because we deny it. And holiness does not thrive where discernment is ignored. His warning is still alive today. And it asks one simple question. What in your home has no place in your spirit? Padre Pio believed in the power of holy simplicity, not just in words or theology, but in the spaces we live in. He often said that grace flows more freely in a place that is quiet, clean, and spiritually clear. A home without clutter, a heart without idols. The Lord speaks where silence reigns, he said. But when noise, distraction, and the symbols of darkness fill the space, grace cannot settle. So maybe the answer isn't always found in doing more. Maybe it starts by removing what doesn't belong. Maybe it's time to walk slowly through your home, room by room, corner by corner, not with fear, but with prayer, with the eyes of the soul wide open, and to ask, gently but honestly, what have I welcomed in and without realizing it? What have I accepted because it was beautiful, trendy, exotic, because it felt powerful or mysterious? What sits on the shelf or hangs on the wall that might carry more than just history, but a spiritual presence? Because sometimes the greatest barrier to God's blessings is not the storm outside, but the object we placed on our mantle, or the symbol we wear without understanding, or the image we see every day, without questioning. And when we choose to remove it, when we surrender it, let go of it, burn it if we must, we're not just clearing physical space, we're making room for miracles. Peace can return, prayer becomes alive again. The atmosphere shifts, because grace does not compete with darkness, it waits for it to be removed. So what should we do? Padre Pio's answer was simple. Clean the temple of the heart, the temple of the home. And then, watch what heaven is waiting to do.